Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, dear guests. Welcome to our Globalization and Higher Education Conference, the first of what we hope will be many events that Boğaziçi University and the Foreign Policy Association hold together. On behalf of both, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, many of whom have traveled great distances to be here. With us this morning are many special guests: Foreign Policy Association board members, presidents and provosts of top Turkish universities, former presidents of Boğaziçi University, senior members of Boğaziçi University's administration, senate, and executive board, professors and faculty members from several institutions, including our own, influential thought leaders and journalists, former ambassadors and members of the diplomatic community, representatives from and leading think tanks, NGOs, and business and commerce associations, alumni and friends of both Boğaziçi University and New York University, and of course, our eminent speakers who so graciously accepted to be here today. Thank you to you all for joining us on what for Boğaziçi University is a very special occasion. We have a very full program today, a copy of which I hope each of you has. We have an incredible lineup, and I'm certain that our speakers will provide you with plenty of food for thought. It is first of all my pleasure to invite to the podium President Gülay Barbarosoğlu, who took over the reins of Boğaziçi University in 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming President Barbarosoğlu to the podium.
Good morning, distinguished guests, dear friends, dear colleagues. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you today to Boğaziçi University for our Globalization and Higher Education Conference. We have partnered with the Foreign Policy Association, a distinguished, private, non-profit, non-partisan education organization based in New York City that aims at developing awareness, understanding, and informed opinion on global issues and U.S. foreign affairs. I cannot think of a better partner to cooperate with to discuss global higher education, particularly today when our neighborhood is in such turmoil. Of course, as is often the situation. This conference is most meaningful for Boğaziçi University, not only because it is the first in what I hope will be many occasions of cooperation with the FPA, but also because its topic will allow us to raise major issues, or rather challenges, that we are facing in the field of higher education. These, I believe, are challenges that we need to be aware of, we need to be ready for, and we need to be proactive in confronting. Contemporary higher education is being structurally transformed and reshaped by the processes of globalization. The ever-growing rate of student mobility that is noticeable not only on our own campus, but on university campuses all over the world, is perhaps the most readily visible aspect of this phenomenon. Higher education institutions are being rewoven with new forms of international connectivity, exchanges of academic programs, intellectual partnerships, and multi-partner projects. The public and universal access to academic knowledge has never been easier in the history of humanity. There are ever-increasing flows of faculty, students, ideas, and resources across institutional and national borders. These changes present not only challenges, but opportunities as well. As is often the case with such transformative trends, those institutions that not only follow them, but can actually welcome, internalize, and support these trends will ultimately prove sustainable and successful. Universities face another challenge in the learning and teaching landscape that is being developed on the heels of fascinating technological advancements. These range from online open courses to new technological tools that are available in higher education. This is yet another field where we should pay closer attention to better adapt to the needs and expectations of changing times and conditions. How do we make best use of new technologies without sacrificing our commitment to excellence in teaching? There are so many hard-pressing questions that we need to tackle seriously. This conference comes at a time where the discussion on global higher education is about to be polarized between two extremes. Some argue that the university as a 1,000-year-old institution has reached the end of its cycle and will be extinct, whereas others contend that the university is now more relevant than ever. Today, we are very lucky to have with us representatives from several of the finest institutions that follow different strategies in global engagement. We will hear from our speakers about their first-hand experience and their perspectives on the relationship between globalization and higher education. I am certain that our conference will provide an enlightening and stimulating platform where we discuss how to harness the power of universities in today's world so that they provide their students and their communities with the universal skills to better people's welfare all over the world. Now I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Mr. Noel Latif, my partner in making this conference possible, a true friend and global citizen. Mr. Latif has been the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Foreign Policy Association since 1995. Under his leadership, the FPA has grown to become one of the world's most effective and influential providers of public education on international affairs. Among its many accomplishments are a network of World Affairs Councils that stretches across the United States in 95 cities, the longest-running television series devoted to international issues, of course, and the leading foreign policy website. In New York City, the Foreign Policy Association's annual World Leadership Forum provides a unique opportunity for business leaders and cutting-edge thinkers from the public sector and academia to think strategically about the future with their peers. In my view, one of the chief achievements of the FPA is its Great Decisions program, which has flourished into a multidimensional global studies program that has incorporated over 1,000 colleges and universities into international affairs courses, has led some 450,000 individuals to participate in community-based discussion groups, and has reached an audience estimated at 1.2 million through the television series broadcast on BBC. It's a powerhouse, and we are honored to have it as our partner today, tomorrow, and always. Oh, by the way, as you may know, one of the topics of Great Decisions 2014 has been elected as Turkey. Mr. Latif, I would like to thank you and your delegation for being here today and for partnering with us to make this conference possible. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
President Barbarossolu, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself and my colleagues at the Foreign Policy Association, let me say how much we are looking forward to our deliberations today and how delighted we are to be here in this great city of Istanbul that bridges East and West and on this beautiful campus of Boğaziçi University. At the Foreign Policy Association, our focus is not so much on policy as it is on education, which we see as a bridge to a better future for all the inhabitants of this planet. We believe that higher education plays a key role in socializing individuals to be responsible citizens, not only in their communities, but in our shrinking world. In this regard, universities are vital proponents and facilitators of the phenomenon known as globalization, characterized by unprecedented movement of goods, capital, people, ideas, and speeded by new technologies of information transfer and communication. The growing integration of the world economy has enabled millions to improve their quality of life. It has also increased competition and called into question the role of higher education in preparing graduates for the challenges they will encounter in the course of their lives. This more competitive environment has exposed as never before the truth that academic graduation is a symbolic milestone. For we never graduate from acquiring knowledge or from self-improvement. And a vital aspect of education is developing the capacity for lifelong learning. The challenge, it has been said, is to prepare students not only for the difficult work of obtaining their degrees here and now, but for challenges that cannot be foreseen, with knowledge not yet developed, using tools not yet invented. To think critically and creatively are imperative if we are to overcome the hurdles that face humankind as a whole, impervious to nationality or ethnicity or to religious or other affiliation. Albert Einstein said it well: "The world we have created today has problems which cannot be solved by thinking the way we thought when we created them." Arguably, we confront today challenges ranging from climate change to nuclear proliferation that are among the most ominous in all of human history. Universities cannot, under these circumstances, retreat to their ivory towers. To continue with business as usual would be tantamount to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Instead, universities must ask, what kind of students do they wish to graduate? And into what kind of world do they want to send them forth? Few leaders in higher education have given these questions more thought and have acted more decisively upon them than our next speaker, who transformed New York University Law School into the global law school, and who has propelled New York University as a whole to the forefront of the ranks of the world's foremost institutions of higher learning. It gives me great pleasure to invite to the podium the president of New York University, John Sexton.
Looking to see if there's a clock, so I'll have to keep this. It's a great statement that there's not a clock in this room. It's a place of meditation and contemplation and deep thought and timeless ideas. But I have this here, and I'm going to work to try to maintain a good bit of time at the end for us to have a dialogue. I can't thank Noel and Gulay enough for inviting me. I'm a teaching university president for as long as I've been alive, and an adult, if you consider a 17-year-old an adult. I've needed the classroom to maintain my vital organs. So this is my 55th year of teaching, and all through my time as dean and all through my time as president, now those two things together, 28 years, the last 28 years, I've always taught a full faculty schedule. I've never understood people that call it a teaching load. I've never viewed it as a load. I've viewed it as a tremendous privilege, and opening the presence of students' potentialities and viewing them is one of the great joys of my professional life. I bring this up only because I am hemmed in by the fact that I don't cancel my classes, and it sometimes requires feats of great temporal and physical prestidigitation. So it is that I can't be with you. And this is such a glorious conference. I'd love to be here throughout the whole thing, but I've just gotten in a few hours ago because Sunday's the first day of the week in the Emirates, and I teach 2 classes every couple of weeks in Abu Dhabi, and my classes at NYU are on Tuesdays. So I have to get back. You know, usually I have a wonderful rest to prepare me for the week. Give me a plane, don't give me any food, don't give me any wine, just give me something flat. It can be the floor, if that be, and a 14-hour flight, and it's heaven. It's heaven. No internet. You can do writing, you can do thinking, and you can do sleeping. I end up coming back as if from a spa. But when they proposed this, I couldn't resist. So it was the 2:40 a.m. flight from Abu Dhabi to here this morning, and I have to get a flight back this evening to be back for class tomorrow. So I apologize to that. I know that I will be the lesser for it. I think one of the things that brings us all here is this extraordinary university. It's been a pleasure. I've known of it from the distance. Istanbul you'd have to be somehow numb as a human being not to have Istanbul in your list of favorite cities. It's such an extraordinary place, especially for people that have the gene that Noel has just described. You know, this kind of this uber gene, this cosmopolitan in the classic Greek sense of the word cosmopolitan gene. This place is very special. What occurred to me was very interesting is as I learned more about it, you've just had your 150th anniversary. We're coming up on our 200th anniversary. There must have been something in the water of great thinkers. Interestingly, thinkers from outside of academia in that period in the early 19th century. Our founder, Albert Gallatin, who was Jefferson and Madison's Secretary of Treasury, and then became the ambassador to France first, and then to the United Kingdom, England, at the time. And when he was ambassador in England, he became very close friends with Jeremy Bentham. And they looked at the universities of their day, and they said, things are happening that require a completely new vision of what a university is. Now, Goulet is right that the university is a well-tested entity. Never forget that. It is a well-tested entity. You know, with all the fads that come and all of the changes that come, be careful. There are 85 institutions in the world today that exist structurally the way they did 500 years ago. And so you could name a few, right? It's a great game to play with yourself. So the English Parliament, the Vatican. You take 8 off the board because there are 8 cantons in Switzerland. So I'm giving you 10 of the 85. 70 of the remaining 75 are universities. Of course, none of them American universities. So think about that for a second. There's something powerful in the concept of a university, and deep down, what that power is essentially is that. Now you have to be careful. People think of me as an academic lawyer because I was the dean of NYU's law school for 14 years. But before I went to law school, I was chairman of a religion department, and my first doctorate is in religion, not triumphalist religion. If you want to get my views on religion, I did a book out of a course that I teach at NYU, which my publisher now says I have to describe as my New York Times best-selling book, because apparently if you make the list once, you can say that, you know. So the paperback is now available. All the money goes for financial aid for NYU students. Buy it, give it away to friends, you know. It's called Baseball as a Road to God. So if you write a book like that and you identify as a Catholic and you're married to a Jewish woman and you've raised your children Jewish, you're not a religious triumphalist. Okay, but here comes the theologian in me. So perhaps there are two things that distinguish us from other beings. Perhaps what theologians call the soul or spirit is one of them. But one that we know distinguishes ourselves from other beings is the mind, is thought. And that's what universities do, right? That's what we do. We advance thought, we inculcate the capacity to think and to advance thought. That's the business of a university, you know, from the Bow Tree and Socrates to today. So, yes, it was that Albert Gallatin and Jeremy Bentham said the time had come to change, but they didn't truck with the fundamentals. They didn't truck with the core. They saw the great universities of their countries, and for Bentham it was Oxford and Cambridge. For Gallatin it was the Ivies, and they shared certain characteristics. They were available only to the elites. They were highly theoretical, il penseroso, you know, Milton's il penseroso. They were typically way out in the country, right? I mean, New York City, at the time we're talking, for those of you that are familiar with NYU, I want you to visualize Washington Square Park and the arch that was put up for the 100th anniversary of Washington's inauguration. It obviously wasn't up yet in the 1820s. And there are some red houses just behind that. Those were the summer homes of the wealthy from the city who came out to the country. Everything behind them was farmland. Columbia was way out in the country. And the grid was not laid down. 14th Street and above is where New York, Manhattan Island begins to make sense, right? You get below 14th Street and you know, you really have to know a native like me, because the streets are spaghetti, right? They're intersected and twist around, and there's actually one intersection of West 10th and West 10th. So no matter which way you go, you're on West 10th. So this, what Gallatin and Bentham said was the major changes are occurring. Democracy, the Industrial Revolution, the emergence of the merchant class. And this pressed them. Now, let's face it took them a while to get to women, it took them even longer to get to minorities, but it pressed them to say, we need a different form of education. Cities were beginning to become the centers of activity. So we should be, their words, in and of the city. We should produce practical knowledge. And so our first chaired professor was Samuel Morse, who, by the way, was a professor of fine arts when he invented the telegraph and Morse code in our building. The first picture of a human face was taken by John Draper, our second professor. So practical knowledge, and broadly available to the merchant class. So they created this new concept of a university. And as I look at the founding 150 years ago of what I'll call BU, okay, this is the European BU. I understand there's a great BU in Boston called Boston University. But but your founding, even if you go down to the statement of purpose and the mission of your university as it was laid out by Hamlin and Robert, it's really the same kind of idea. Practical, useful, knowledge, connectivity. You carry it through with your notion of sustainability today. So it really is a kick for me to be here and offer some remarks to kind of set a tone. And you'll recognize in them the theologian in me, because we're trained to think in, at least centuries, and sometimes millennia. And if you look at what's going on in the world through that lens today, and you're asking yourself the question that every university has to ask, even if times are less turbulent, because we're in another tectonic change today, right? I mean, you listed some of them, but the world is in tumult in some very fundamental ways that I'll describe. And one could say that we're at a major inflection point. My family and I go into the wilderness, and we were at the North Pole, and working our way in this icebreaker and we passed a glacier that was 120 miles long. And some of the glaciers we saw had migrated to the North Pole from what we would call today the Caribbean. And somewhere along the vast billions of year history that's represented when you see something like that, or the Grand Canyon, somewhere along the line, relatively recently, humankind appears. And we're a glory of creation. No matter what your view of how it happens or how it evolves, we're a glory of creation. And it could be, after all of those hundreds of thousands of years of work by our predecessors to get us to this point, this could be the century we could screw it up. I mean, think about it for a second. We could really waste it all if we're not careful. So we're at an important inflection point, and of course we all agree, we're all united by the fact that universities are going to, play an important part, maybe the important part, I would argue the important part, in resolving that issue the right way. Now, if they are going to do that, I mean, and it's very, very important we understand right at the top that when we talk about universities like this one, like the ones represented in this room, we're talking about a small percentage of the overall higher education symphony. And we should keep in mind that higher education is a symphony orchestra of educational types, and matching students with the right part of the orchestra is an important part of the common enterprise of all of us in higher education. There'll be some things, and Noel would be right to argue that a kind of awareness of the world should come through all parts of the orchestra. There should be a kind of, like, you have to have the same scales, and it's part of the scale that the musicians in the orchestra should be playing. But we're talking about the leading universities in the world, the 200 to 500 leading universities in the world out of the tens of thousands of universities that exist. Some of them, in intimate settings like this or smaller. I mean, a large class in NYU Abu Dhabi is the class of 20 students that I taught yesterday. But others, massive, right? Hundreds of thousands of students technologically online. So, and that whole variety is going to be important, but there's wherever you are in the orchestra, who's ever given the privilege that we're given of kind of leading's not a good word, describing, telling the story of a university, because universities are not command and control enterprises. They're places where people like us can do what I call evocative leadership. You can tell a story. The theologians know the power of mythos, not myth the way Americans use it, where myth means falsehood, but myth that it's the deep experienced truth that sometimes can only be put into words with a story, not with cognitive categories. And our job is to create a story that's recognizable and aspirational at the same time for our universities, and to tell that story and call people to it. And to do that, you really have to spend a lot of time noticing, what the assets and special contribution your university can make. And we're in a privileged position given universities like the ones that we lead. It's a very special place to be, and arguably, at least in some ways, it's the most important place because it will. What happens at the great thought-leading universities of the world will permeate all the rest of the orchestra. So the Jesuits had a phrase for this. Business people have a phrase for it. Since we're educators, we're not allowed to use the business phrase for it, which would be value proposition. What's the value proposition? You do that and right away, this is further evidence. Sexton in Istanbul in front of educators said value proposition, more evidence of the corporatization of NYU. So you use Latin, right? So the Jesuits called this the ratio studiorum. And it works for everything, right? You have to know what your ratio studiorum is for each class that you teach. Each course, which is an ensemble of classes, which major, and then working its way out. It's another way of saying what we should ask ourselves every day as individuals. Everybody in this room won the lottery, right? We were born smart. We had nothing to do with that. It just happened to us. But that then imposes on us the obligation of using that talent and what comes from it in a useful way. Okay, so am I living a useful life? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. When you're the president or leader of a university or a dean of a school or even given a classroom, the answer to that question, at least with regard to your professional life, is very much tied in, is how is NYU useful? How is BU useful? That's called the value proposition by the business people. What's distinctive about it? I mean, it can't just be, we're going to be better. More excellence. That's not enough. What's the contribution you're making to the enterprise, the common enterprise of higher education? So, how could we think about this in the context of today's topic? Well, I'm going to, first of all, start by saying there are two big trends that kind of animate my thinking of this. And it was crystallized for me. I was a reluctant president. The trustees wanted me to be president of NYU about 4 years before I wanted to be president, or I'm not sure I ever got quite to where I wanted to be. I'm very happy. It's a fulfilling life. I think I'm being useful. But I really had to, before I left my parish, which was the law school, where I knew I was doing good by creating humanitarian, humanistic lawyers, I had to figure out what there was about NYU that would be useful, as opposed to just another good university. And at the same time, Mayor Mike Bloomberg asked me to do something unusual. It was right before his election for his second term as mayor. This drove the people around him crazy. They couldn't believe he was doing this. He convened them, all of his commissioners, for 2 days on Staten Island. The mayor was notable for going to the islands. He never said where he was going. This particular island was just over the Verrazano Bridge and isn't seen as glorious a place to go as, say, Bermuda or St. John, But the mayor was off in the islands, and there I was, and I was given the job of saying, this was 2004 or 5, what will it take to make New York City a world capital city 50 years from now? It was kind of a thought exercise. You heard me talk about some things, which I'll share with you now to begin with. So the first big trend that I began to notice about 5 or 6 years before that, and Mike had heard me talk about it at dinners and things like that, was that what I call a network of idea capitals was developing. Now I know I'm delighted that there are people here from Brooklyn. And I understand that for many of you, and I admire this, English is your second language, and to listen to someone that speaks English in Brooklyn, says things like coffee and park is hard. So the word I just said is idea, I-D-E-A. It has no R in it, okay? So thought, that's an easier word. Thought capitals, but I called them idea capitals. So there was a network, and there are different leagues. If you think of this as soccer, for example, the UK soccer, there's a Premier League that's developing, but then cities will get relegated down to the next league and so forth and so on. And so these idea capitals are developing, and what's happening is that these idea capitals, and let's say there are 12 or 16 of them in the world, they're magnets for talent, and will be magnets for talent on a going forward basis. I began to notice this in recruiting faculty. Many of us in the room are involved in recruiting faculty. Now, if you're recruiting a great neuroscientist, there are two things that neuroscientists want. They want other great neuroscientists, right? You've got to have a critical mass of people. They want to talk to people about their passion, neuroscience. So you do cluster hiring if you're building, whatever, but you want to have a good couple of dozen neuroscientists around. But most of them, in fact, the ones, truth be told, that are the most healthy-minded faculty, that are able to become part of a common enterprise, a team, they don't want to talk only to neuroscientists. And also, by the way, they have spouses and kids and families. And so all of a sudden, what becomes important is understanding. And I was much more intimately involved in recruiting faculty when I was a dean than I am now, although I get involved maybe in a couple of dozen cases a year now. And I always want to know about the family and what is going to create happiness at the dinner table. And I began to notice, so the way I put it, and this is a nod to my wife, people have asked me, where did you get this phrase? Because it's got a catchy phrase I'm going to give you now, if you haven't read any of my stuff on this. Where did you get this phrase? And truth be told, I got this phrase because my wife was the head of the foundation that was created with the money of the man that created Revlon, Charles Revson. And his first lipstick was called Fire and Ice. And I had the concept, I had the substance of the concept, I didn't have a label. And I said, because urbanologists in the 20th century said great world cities are brought together by fire, finance, insurance, real estate. And the concept that I'm going to offer you today is that in the 21st century, fire is a necessary but not sufficient condition to be a magnet for talent. That what's necessary is ice as well. The intellectual, the cultural, the educational environment that attracts smart people, fire and ice. And that was the theme I began to hit with Mayor Mike and his people. And it became a theme that began to animate my thinking about what was happening in the world as these idea capitals developed. Daniel Patrick Moynihan was asked in the 1960s in India, how do you create a world-class city? And he said, create 2 world-class universities and wait 200 years. But if you think about it, universities are a critical element of fire and ice, both because they're consumers of ice and producers of ice. I mean, I can feel this very, very much in the role that we're playing in the Emirates, for example. Yes, we have NYU Abu Dhabi, a liberal arts college, a research university, all kinds of faculty research going on. But equally important, we run about 30 conferences a year there. We have what we call the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which is a series of speakers, 2-3 a week. And it becomes the cultural fabric of the city as we make Abu Dhabi one of these Premier League idea capitals. So universities are important for that. So that's the first concept, and that's relatively benign. Nice analogy, if you want to think about it and tie it back into universities, is I could probably do one out of the crossroads city of Istanbul. I use the Silk Road if I'm in China. But let me just go with my Jesuit European background, the Italian Renaissance. Okay, so if you've read Jacob Burckhardt's History of the Renaissance in Italy, if you had said to Leonardo or to Michelangelo, you can only do your art if you do it only here in Venice, you would not have gotten them. Right? They were part of an intelligentsia, a creative class, a gifted class that wanted to circulate among Milano and Rome and Venice and Florence and so forth and so on. Okay, just freeze that thought for a second. Think of this Premier League of idea capitalists together. I'm going to submit to you, and I could give you example after example after example where we've already demonstrated this with what we've done at NYU, if you want to when I come back in questions. But by and large, the modern university says you can only do your art if you do it in Venice. We say to our faculty members, essentially, you have to stay in situ. And it's ironic, isn't it? Because universities have always operated beyond sovereignty. You know, and of course, as the two of you said, today the issues go beyond sovereignty. But even when the issues were more local, and even in disciplines that are more local, there's always a world network. I've been blessed in my life with a friendship with an extraordinarily bright person who was, for my mind, a terrific leader. People have different views on that, Gordon Brown. And we were having breakfast once, just the two of us, and he knew more about NYU than he should have. And we were talking, you know, he's saying, you know, I love this idea you have of kind of a circulating world. And I said that phrase to him. I said, Gordon, universities have always operated beyond sovereignty. And he always kept a pad there. And he wrote it down. He said, I love that phrase. I'm going to use that phrase, beyond sovereignty. And I remember saying to him, Mr. Prime Minister, this is why your polls are in the tank. I said, John, president of the university, okay to say beyond sovereignty. Gordon, head of government, not a good idea to say beyond sovereignty. But you know what? He taught me something. He said, you're wrong. You're wrong. The network is going to be developing regardless. And the key question is, will London, will New York, will Istanbul, will Abu Dhabi, will Shanghai be Premier League stops? And what role will they play? So this force is there. Okay, second force. The world is miniaturizing. It's growing small. We call this interdependence. We call this globalization, right? For me, some of us have been thinking about this since we picked up in college back in the 1960s the writings of the great Jesuit theologian Teilhard de Chardin, who talked about how, you know, it was inevitable. Now, he saw it theologically. And he took the doctrine of biological evolution and married it, even though at the time Catholicism and Christianity widely saw evolutionary biology as an attack on its theory of the creation and evolution of the world. Teilhard took it and said, no, it's a wonder, and there's a metaphor here for spiritual growth. I'm not here to preach to you. I'm going to say there's a metaphor for a progressive view of the world that you heard from Noel when he was up here. So Teilhard summarized it by saying, species emerge, then they diverge into a multiplicity of forms, the wonderful biological diversity we love, and then there comes a convergence, emergence, divergence, convergence, into what he called point omega, which for him was foreshadowed by Christ and the capacity to love deeply and completely sacrificially. Put that aside. What is the metaphor in a broad view over millennia of the evolution of human society? You know, the emergence of humankind essentially in a tribalistic consciousness, a divergence into the great individuality, which is expressed nowhere better than in Greenwich Village, New York. You know, where if you chose to fully tattoo yourself, strip stark naked, and walk through the park, no one would notice. Okay, so this is individualism run amok, right? And now we have that, right? But the world is miniaturizing, and we're all in each other's faces, and gating strategies are not going to work. Okay, just say the word ISIS, or the initials ISIS. Gating strategies don't work. The question is going to be, and this is the deep question of this century, I think, how are we going to respond to this miniaturization? Okay, we have the potency of the idea capitals to provide thought and connectivity and elevation of humankind. But, you know, we're very, very good at othering. I mean, essentially, that's what my Baseball as a Road to God book says, you know. So I'm a Yankee fan. I hate Red Sox fans. Now, fortunately, we don't kill or fight wars over that most of the time. Okay? And you know, do we ever notice that it's an accident of birth that made me a Yankee fan and made my brother-in-law a Red Sox fan and also made me a Catholic and him a Jew, and all of the other things we use to separate ourselves, be they geographical or these things that we call nation states or other ways to team. And even Noel spoke, and I kind of jar every time. Now, I'll grant you, this is one of these 500-year ideas or 100-year ideas. But the whole way we've come to talk about education and economic activity is competitiveness. You know, we better get about it, or else we're going to be beaten by the Chinese. You know, it's as if we're in a camp and we have, you know, divided into groups, you know, by flags, and instead of viewing knowledge as a positive-sum game, economic activity as a positive-sum game, human interaction as a positive-sum game, we have this deep capacity to other. So what are we going to choose on that? Are we going to choose, on the one hand, the clash of civilizations, or on the other hand, a more, what I was taught to call ecumenical view? You know, when John the 23rd taught us that even if we maintained our own faith, and excuse the religious metaphor, but it's where it comes from in me, even if we maintained our own faith, we were better off if we understood the faiths of others and incorporated them from their vantage points. So the man under whom I did my doctoral dissertation in 1963, when I met him, was the world's leading expert on a single medieval Christian theologian, St. Anselm. By 1983, I was celebrating him at the United Nations for the publication of his 60-volume work on world spirituality, which had 25 faith traditions in it. He was still a Christian, but he could understand the depths. It's learning. If you want the ecumenical movement, if you want Teilhard, if you want John the 23rd in a metaphor, it's learning to view the world not through the one window you're given, but through the many facets of a diamond. And it's not relativism. It's not relativism at all. It's this classic cosmopolitanism, and it's characterized by something Americans aren't very good at practicing, and that is deep humility. You know, deep humility. You know, at my town hall last week with students, one of the students who had been ideologically informed, by one of her professors who had a conclusion in search of proof. And she got up and she read to me a list of indictments about Emirati culture and, you know, how could NYU be in a place where workers live 40 to a room and so forth. And my first response, before I told her it was utterly counterfactual and you shouldn't believe everything you read in the New York Times, was to say it sounded to me that she was describing the condition of migrant workers in Texas, where my friend Bill Beardall works with Texas Rural Legal Aid. But of course, Americans, you know, can cast stones. not realizing the irony of some of the things they do. The big choice as the world miniaturizes is, are we going to use the network, the idea capitals network that's there, to do what universities do well, right? We've always been the thought advances, the understanding advances. As our societies worldwide, very much in the United States, but even worldwide, have developed increasingly an allergy to complexity and nuance, the universities are the place. We do nuance, we do complexity. So, those are the big trends. Now, in 10 minutes, no more than 10, and that will allow us about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, I'm going to describe to you NYU's response to that. Okay, just as one, because those that are running the conference thought this might be an interesting case study. And I don't offer it as universal. My view is that this will be seen as a premier form of higher education. 20, 25 years from now, there'll probably be a dozen schools worldwide that will be practicing it as I'm going to describe it to you. This is kind of the full Monty. We're all in. There'll be others that will use different approaches to it, and I'll give you some outlines for that. And even though I can't be here for the balance of the day, you have one of my extraordinary colleagues in the former president of NYU Poly, the man who really brought engineering back to NYU, also the former Secretary of the Navy, Undersecretary, I guess, but I always call him Mr. Secretary, Jerry Hulton, and he'll be here, and he gets this, if anything, better than I do. So, the buzz phrase is make the world your major. Make the world your major. So you want to come here and study economics. You know, we've had 3 Nobel laureates in economics in the last 10 years. You'll get great education in economics or theater or history or business or whatever you want, but then you're going to get at the experiential level and the thought level an education in being an instrument of the creation of a community of communities. So the view of the world is not homogeneity, but a community of communities. The elements of a watch, each identifiable, but interlocking into a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. That's the Teilhardian view of the next stage of human development, okay, taking the theology out of it, is that we are a community of communities celebrating simultaneously the wonder of the diversity of creation and the joy it gives us to be able to see through those many facets of a diamond, and on the other hand, the commonality among us and the common enterprise of being human that's not competitive, but is a positive sum game. So, very quickly here, let me start by saying what NYU's, so the phrase we use is global network university, what it's not. Okay, it's not a branch campus system. Okay, branch campus system is you got a kind of got headquarters and you got branches, and it's the French Foreign Legion, and you send off folks, you know, and maybe you never see them again, but they're over there. They got your uniform on, and you know, and it can be of varying levels of quality. Okay, some of it is frankly designed simply to bring revenue back to the mothership. Okay, we're not that. We're not an international global footprint like IBM or something like that. You know, I talk to the people at IBM, and they feel they're very much siloed in their various enterprises. The best phrase I've been able to come up with to describe what we are is we are an organic circulatory system which creates a new structure for the university, which is present in the premier league idea capitals of the world. Not all of them, because we can't be every place, but you're going to see we're on every continent. And you circulate. And this is all about quality. So I read and I take seriously the dangers that are described by the dean of the Harvard Business School. I take that seriously. This, in my view, is the best way to maintain quality. And it's an irresistible talent magnet for a disproportionately high share of the high talent people in the world, because they don't want to just do their art in Venice, or their spouses don't, or they don't want for their children that world, or whatever. And if you can give them the capacity to circulate, faculty, students, and staff, it's a talent magnetization thing. Now, I'm going to take you very quickly through its evolution, okay? So 1.0, now I was named in May 2001, so before 9/11. The whole case for this escalates, the case for this escalates with 9/11. But we were beginning this before 9/11. And it was simply an accident of my being involved with two friends, a fellow named Dan Doctoroff, who later became deputy mayor in New York, a brilliant guy, had just finished running Bloomberg, the financial side for Mayor Mike, and a fellow named Jay Kriegel, who was deputy mayor under John Lindsay, a great mayor of New York 30 years earlier, who's just Jay's everywhere. He's the Zelig of New York. And the two of them had decided they wanted to get the Olympics to New York. And I was the third wheel. And they came up with a punchline for the Olympic bid. And I said to them, I don't care if we get the Olympics. You've created a view of what New York is. That is the mythos that we should be using to describe the city. And it was this. The punchline for the Olympic bid was, come to New York, the world's second home. Every team will have a neighborhood. Whew. Think of the power of that. So, I stole it with their permission, 1,000%, So we now, we sat at Washington Square, no campus, half of our buildings not next to NYU buildings, can't even see an NYU building, no gates. I used to say no grass, but I realize that is a double meaning, so I say no blades of grass. Okay. And we felt the burden of Columbia's Shangri-La campus, right? You go through that gate, you could be, wherever, right? What a contrast. And suddenly, thanks to Dan and Jay, I said, wait a minute. Our cacophony, our complexity, the fact that we don't do big-time sports, we never gather except at graduation in Yankee Stadium when we do it gloriously. We never gather as a big crowd at NYU. If we get 100 people for our sporting events, we do Division III, okay? So it's all micro communities. So this becomes a learning opportunity. And then, think of this, you've got New York City. You can hear the prayers, the language, taste the food, hear the music of every country in the world by getting on a subway. So we started running buses. Saturday and Sunday, there'd be buses in front of the library, and kids come, they get on a bus, and they go to wherever. And there's an old timer there with a restaurant, happy to give you a discount meal, and it's got a map, and he's talking the language, and the music is playing. And if you do that Saturday and Sunday, 14 weeks every semester, you can visit 200 countries by the time you graduate. And this is not Epcot City. This is the real stuff, right? The real stuff. So it was just this vision, because New York is the first ecumenical city. 40% of the citizens were born outside of the United States. And New York City's public school is the first public school system in the world that could say that that public school system has in it kids from every country in the world, born in those countries, not descendant. And you know what? The people in those neighborhoods, they may be Irish like my ancestors, or Italian, or Turk, or whatever. Yes, and what they are, they're New Yorkers. I talked to the prime minister of a major Northern European country. He says to me, I've got people in my parliament that refer to themselves as Turks. They're in his parliament, not the Turkish parliament. So New York is the first, uber community of communities. So you begin teaching that, okay? So then the next logical thing, 2.0, is, it's nice to visit the Italians in Little Italy, but shouldn't we take them on their turf? It's all about getting out of your comfort zone. It's the second major. In addition to the economics, you're getting the world as your major. Building a community of communities as your major. So the second, you open up a study away site in Florence. And a real study, because quality, remember it's about quality. So the courses, the faculty, they're NYU courses, they're NYU faculty. You've got an internship program there. You've got extracurricular activities. You've got all of the student life things that are important these days. Student wellness, especially if you're going to get them out of their comfort zone. You've got to be able to say to their parents they're going to be safe. And so my daughter went to Yale. Heavy headwinds against studying away. Heavy headwinds, to the point where when my wife died suddenly on Katie's first week of her second semester of her freshman year, and we went up and said, she wants to be home with her brother and me, can she take 4 courses with award-winning professors at NYU? The answer was we only allowed 2 courses to be taken away, of course, the Yale way, which is wonderful, of course. She got a great education. Only 2 courses. Being a law professor, I used the Socratic method. I said to the dean I was dealing with, does Yale take transfer students? Yes. When they come, do they get credit for their year before they were here? Yes. I thought that was the end. I didn't think I had to ask the next question. But the result was Katie took 2 courses, no more than 2 courses at NYU, and had to go up to Yale because she wanted to go back as a sophomore. Wanted to go back up to Yale during the summer to take 2 courses in a Yale building that were taught by New Haven high school teachers. But it was the Yale way. And when she went to study away in Prague, she was in a hostel, and it was a Yale professor that was there for the summer, but there were none after. So when she was mugged on the streets of Prague, there was no one to whom she could turn. Thank God we have a study away site for NYU there, and we could mobilize everybody. So you develop a network, so that's 2.0, study away sites. So we now have, and I'm going to do some double counting, you'll see in a moment, 15 study away sites, high quality courses, pathways. So if you're a pre-med, you can't go to all 15, but there'll be 5 of them where you can get organic chemistry with a first-rate teacher. Or if you're a Tisch student in dance, there'll be 3 that you can go to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the departments and schools and units have taken ownership. This is the quality part of it, you see? Because if it's a circulatory system as opposed to a branch campus system, and that person that takes Economics 101 in London, because each of our sites has personality, right? So it's going to be in my Economics 201 class. I care about that. And I'm going to care about who's been appointed to do it and what the content of the course is, because it's articulated into my department and part of my major. So 15 study away sites on 6 continents. 3.0. We looked at this and we said if we want to be the first ecumenical university, where's the Arab and Muslim world? Okay? And then the question was, okay, can you do it? And we started looking, and that was when we discovered this extraordinary leader, Mohammed bin Zayed, in Abu Dhabi. And I went to meet with him to talk about a study away site, and he said, I've read your stuff about idea capitals. I want to make Abu Dhabi the idea capital of the Gulf. Would you consider creating a full presence of NYU? A to Z for students. With study away, of course, and students from anywhere in the world. And he went a step farther, and he said, we've been blessed here. And this man is extraordinary. I know. Look, until about 2 years ago, half my faculty thought we were in Abu Dubai. Okay, so I mean, which almost proves the need, right, to be there. Okay, and the level of ignorance, the fact that people don't know who Zayed was, the founder of this country. Okay, and I'll tell you, in Zayed and his son Mohammed bin Zayed, I mean, I've been privileged to know many heads of government, heads of state. These are people, I can't speak for Zayed, but Mohammed bin Zayed is as close as I've seen to Plato's philosopher king, thinking 50 years ahead. His father, a Bedouin who'd never been in a classroom, said the key to the future is the education of our people and the education of the world. And he says to me, I want to create here a university that's fully integrated into NYU, Start with a liberal arts college. Start with a liberal arts college. And build graduate programs, build a research program. So it's the Henry Rizovsky, Jaroslav Pelikan Research University Liberal Arts undergraduate education. And do it for the best students in the world and find them wherever they are. And we found them. And the first class we brought in 5 years ago, we only wanted 100 students. And we had recruited the president of Swarthmore to be the dean, call it vice chancellor there, because outside the United States that gives him status, and I'm the chancellor, so he can be vice chancellor. People in New York say, oh, that's okay, but people outside New York say, ooh, he's vice chancellor. So Al Bloom had gone over there, and we brought in the first class. Al had said to us, you're going to get a 60% yield. That's what Swarthmore gets. So if we want a class of 100, make 180 offers. But when the kids saw each other, we got a class of 150. And with SAT numbers and grade point averages as good as Harvard's, the very first year. That class just graduated last May. By the way, the class has gotten stronger each year. We had a 90% return on our Office of Admission last year. 15,000 applications for 150 spots. Okay? And kids from every place. And we graduated 140 kids last May, and from 48 countries. And not people in the Emirates from those countries, people literally from the countries. 48 different countries. Median kid speaks 4 languages. And 31 of them came from families where when we brought one member of the family in for graduation, that family member had not been more than 5 miles from home. So just to give you one example, because it's important to my thesis, a young man named Musbah who homeschooled himself till the 8th grade in a tribal village in Ethiopia, walked 5 days to Addis Ababa, persuaded the international school to accept him, and they found out 6 months in he was living in a cardboard box home he had built for himself, no electricity, no water. They gave him housing, graduated number 1 in his class, graduated magna cum laude from NYU, Abu Dhabi last year. And just extraordinary. Out of 140 kids, 3 of them are right now in Rhodes College, Oxford. Think about that for a second. First graduating class, 3 to Rhodes College. When the Chinese saw that we were doing that, so Abu Dhabi was 3.0. Now there are 2 doorways. Kid from the Bronx can choose to come in through New York and encounter dominantly American, massive cacophony. Or come in through Abu Dhabi, where you better like, so we just moved to the new campus, we'll be expanding to 2,000 undergraduates, 1,000 graduate students. But on the former campus, we had 700 students, 102 countries represented, and every sector of society. So you can't avoid people, it's a tight community. Communities there, easy. Over here, you've got to really work at getting community. And then in between, the Chinese came to us and said, we want to do the same thing, and that's how NYU Shanghai happened. Fully government supported there as well. We're the first American university to be licensed as a Chinese university. So we get Chinese funding for our research competitively, and they built us a campus. That campus is just completed as well. 1 million square foot, right in the heart of Pudong. They're building us a dorm, which will be another 1 million square feet. The Abu Dhabi campus is 3 million square feet, 21 buildings, and fully operative now. And the Chinese is somewhere between these two, third doorway. Half that class is Chinese. But you can't apply to us unless you're in the top 60,000 of the 12 million Chinese high school graduates. So you're already in the 99.9th percentile. And then you go through, we do 2 days of interviews for everybody that comes into Abu Dhabi or Shanghai. So now there are 3 doorways. This is 4.0 for kids anywhere in the world. It's all connected technologically, so you can have classes going on in the 18th. So we're all in on this, and we think that's the way to maintain quality, because our faculty circulate. So, I was walking across Washington Square Park last Thursday, and from the 2nd floor of one of our buildings where faculty live, I hear, hey John, and it's Judy Miller, one of our humanists, And she's waving, as she said to me yesterday in Abu Dhabi, like a washerwoman saying hello to me, hanging out her window in New York. And 2 days later, there she is back in Abu Dhabi, where she's teaching this semester. In closing, I'll offer this. There are going to be many ways to do this. So I came over on a Turkish airplane that was an Etihad plane and a JetBlue plane. So there's going to be code sharing, okay? That's going to be one way of doing it. Not simply MOUs and alliances, but deep, because remember, quality control is going to be key, okay? At the other end of the spectrum is the old kind of study away, which was academic tourism. You use your elective subjects, it's not integrated, you may not get credit in your department, but you're in Paris for a year, whether you go to class or not, or the sports staff. That's kind of passé. But there's a significant way to do it, less aggressively than we've done it, which I call code sharing. The key thing that I think all of us have to be conscious of is that it's, I think this is what Abu Dhabi has proven. I've believed it for a long time about the United States. But what Abu Dhabi proved is this: there's talent out there. And unless you're a racist and you think that 3% of the smartest people in the world are in the United States, or that they're only in a certain segment of society, we're really in danger as we go through what's called here in Europe the massification of higher education, that we're going to relegate the poor, the unconnected, the uninformed to online degrees to which the elites will never send their kids. So we got to develop ways to search for the talent that's out there and bring them into the 200 universities to 500 universities I started talking about. And there are ways to do it. So I'm the chairman of the board of something called the University of the People. If you're a high school graduate, you're fluent in English, you have access to the internet, and you're abjectly poor, you're in. It's not a MOOC. We use MOOCs, we use online open source materials. There's a curriculum, there's an exam at the end, it's 32 people in the class, peer-to-peer, volunteer teachers, you take your courses, you get your degree, okay? What we do at NYU Abu Dhabi and NYU Shanghai, because I've got terrific financial aid there that can pay for these kids, in New York I don't, is at the end of the first year, if kids have excelled in the University of the People, we'll bring them in for interviews. So I was teaching yesterday a freshman that we found through the University of the People, an Afghani woman. Okay? Games, contests, use the MOOCs, use technology to find the talent. Don't have to be courses. This is what we as the higher education enterprise have to do as we go forward. Because otherwise, we're going to be leaving the musbahs on the table. So that's it in overview. I don't know if you want me to take some questions or not. I don't want to encroach on other time. But thank you very, very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. Questions, challenges? Don't stand on formality. Yes. Do we have a microphone so that? No, but they want you on the tape, I think.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Abache. I work at the Office of International Programs at Koç University. It's a private not-for-profit university here in Istanbul. One of the challenges that we are starting to tackle and think about is how do you measure the skills of the students in terms of their global awareness, their intercultural skills. So it's very good and nice to say we send out this number of students per semester to these locations and they come back with wonderful stories, anecdotes, videos, Twitter tales. But it's how, as a university, are we measuring what they gain from a study abroad experience, and how does that translate later into their attractiveness as employees or as future entrepreneurs when they come out of the university. So this is something that we're starting to explore and looking at different models, and I wanted to know how does NYU does it.
So this is an extremely important point, and if you do pick up the book Baseball as a Road to God, there's a movement in American baseball called sabermetrics, which reduces everything, to a formula and different elements and so forth. And I say in the book, I'm all for evidence, right? On the other hand, I don't want the measurers to overwhelm the creativity that an old timer can see. You know, like we just had in New York a great baseball player named Derek Jeter. My favorite baseball player of all time is a fellow named Jackie Robinson. You couldn't capture them fully in the evidence of the measurers. And I haven't been re-invited. I was invited to give the keynote 3 years ago of an OECD conference on this topic. And I got up and the theme of my speech was, beware the measurers. They will rob you of your soul. And the measurers, you know, I've got a president in my country who's about to put out a ranking, an official Department of Education ranking of the universities and colleges in the United States based on something that his people are calling, quote, a return on investment, close quote. Well, I'll tell you something. What the Jesuits taught me was the essence of my education, was not the salary I got in my first job. In fact, they would be very upset with us if we said that our education prepared us for our first job. And I pointed out to the President of the United States that in the first 15 years after he graduated from Columbia and Harvard, he had a negative rate of return on his investment in his education, even if his financial aid was counted, because he was a community organizer. So we have to be very, I'm not arguing against measurements. What I'm saying is that we have to be very careful that we have a broad gauge of measurements, some of which will be the easy quantifiable stuff that the measurers will be inclined to stop once they measure them, because they've got an ability then to create a defensible articulation. My submission would be that could be very dangerous, and we've got to give qualitative judgments in. But that we should be measuring is beyond cavil as far as I'm concerned. But we have to make sure that we don't suffocate into some rigid formula that then you begin, we know what people do then, right? They teach to the test. Yes, microphone?
What about the value of going to a different country and getting education in a different language and surviving in that environment, even if you waste academically the year you spend in Paris? What about surviving in a French university?
Yeah, so I'm glad you used Paris, because that's my strongest example to give you. And if you'd used Tel Aviv and I switched to Paris, you would have said, wait a minute, what does that say about Tel Aviv? So it's all, we're very conscious of the bubble danger, right? The danger you create an enclave. And now, when you got kids, 700 kids, and they're from 102 countries, there's a little less danger of the bubble of the world, but then do they get into Emirati culture? And not just expatriate culture, but into the real Emirati culture. So we're constantly on this with our students. Every student that goes to a study away site has to become at least conversationally fluent in the language. And we're pushing them out of their comfort zone, and we're urging them to go a step farther than they're comfortable going. But we want to give them a spectrum of possibilities. So if you go to our study away site in Paris, which is nestled right in the middle of the Sorbonne, it's a beautiful building, and we've got beautiful dorms and, you know, all of our people there and everything else, but you're very much in the throw of things. You can take the NYU Anglophone course of study, where most of your courses will be in English. You can take the NYU Francophone course of study, so there'll be NYU courses, but in French. You can go to the Sorbonne and be part of the NYU community, or you can go to Sciences Po and be part of the NYU community, or you can mix and match the four. Your living situation can be in our dorm, or it can be with a family with whom we have an ongoing relationship that always has, you know, it's a different kid each semester, or you can go out in the market. So we'll get you as far. You're going to have an internship with a French company, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll push you as far out as you can. And we've found, I mean, we now have 60, 70% of our students doing one of these high quality. We don't count it unless it's a semester. So if you go for 2 weeks, we don't count that. Okay, we have J-term courses that are 3 weeks and June-term courses that are 3 weeks that they can do other countries. We don't even count that when we do our international statistics. Full semester, and I'd say half the class, close to half the class now, is doing 2 semesters away. And you could, well, the valedictorian of one of our schools last year had done 5 semesters away, because we've now made it possible for people to start in London, Paris, Florence, and Shanghai. If you do your freshman year study away, then you can really, in the upper years, because of these pathways, you see, that's the key. You got pathways. And you can get as far out as you want. And we encourage you to do it. But it's a question of making your parents comfortable and you comfortable and doing that. I really want to thank you very much. I'm going to hang around for at least another, I want to hear the next speaker and then go on. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
John, thank you very, very much for launching us, getting us off to a great start. As I was listening to you, I was thinking I'd like to sign up for some continuing education courses at NYU. We will take a 15-minute break and then we'll resume. Thank you.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Mr. Sandy Frusher, Vice Chairman of the Nasdaq OMX Group since July 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Frusher to the podium.
I come from New York, so I thought I had insisted that I would precede John Sexton as a condition of my coming, but unfortunately it didn't work out that way. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, students, and faculty. I thank the administration of this great university and the organizers of the Education and Globalization Conference for inviting me to address you today. For me personally, it's always a pleasure to visit Istanbul, and for NASDAQ, it is gratifying to be one representative among others of the private sector at a conference bringing together private, public, and academia. It's fitting, I suppose, as a vice chairman of a global stock exchange and as a global financial technology company, that I've been asked to speak about education as a key to unlocking capital and human potential. We mean by that, of course, that education can unlock the inherent assets of intellect and understanding. The students are here to develop within themselves their human capital. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but it is an apt description nonetheless. For in the time students spend at a university, they will exercise their creativity, hone their skills, fine-tune their abilities, give their creativity a workout, and of course, gather as much knowledge as they possibly can. When they graduate and put it all together, they'll be well equipped to use their human capital to produce economic value, and their degree will make that official. They will be ready to go on to advanced degrees if they so desire, or they can go right into the workplace, learn their trade on their particular job. Whichever path they choose, they will realize the potential of their human capital, that it will start to unlock the financial capital for them in very, very direct ways. There's nothing wrong with that. It means that education is, as we might say at NASDAQ, a good investment. In fact, it's an excellent investment, as students and particularly their parents well know. In the United States, college graduates earn about a third more than high school graduates. Those with advanced degrees, graduate degrees, and those who graduate from professional schools earn even more. And tellingly, the U.S. rate of unemployment today stands at 5.9% overall, but it's only 2.9% for those with college degrees. Here in Turkey, the statistics are even more dramatic. OECD data for 2012 shows that those with university education had a 76% employment rate and earned 91% more than those with just a secondary education, while those with a secondary education had a 51% rate of employment and earned 37% more than those without. That's the payback on higher education. But more than education, does, it does more than just helps you with earning money. Around the globe, the better educated live longer, are in better health, experience greater job satisfaction, and enjoy more prestigious employment than the less well-educated. The security and stability their education has brought them seems to unlock their human potential, as well as that, too. That is a very important thing. It's another excellent return on the education investment. But if that is all that education unlocks, then I would submit it isn't much of an education. For what education requires in a global, interconnected world is a whole other level of unlocking capital. It's the level of unlocking assets of intellect and understanding to ignite innovation, to spread tolerance, and to think critically. Okay, I know some of our most important innovators, all from NASDAQ-listed companies, of course, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, not to mention Lady Gaga, they all dropped out of college. That doesn't mean they weren't educated. Each had a vision, and each went out and acquired whatever knowledge was needed to realize that vision. Besides, there are always exceptions that prove the rule. For the bulk of us, non-exceptional people, however, innovation probably comes in small doses with less impact. Think different commanded the famous Apple advertisement. It was ungrammatical. But it had a point. Education bothers the mind. It works it hard. It just might make it think in fresh ways about old problems. By the same token, education can instill tolerance, and boy, do we need that now. The world is multiform, multidimensional, multilingual, multinational, multi-faith, multi-ethnic, etc., etc. And so closely connected, there is virtually no separation between the people, except for a couple of time zones. The education can broaden our vision and stretch our minds, making us tolerant of the world's multiplicity. And as a glance at the headline shows us, if this world doesn't come together somehow, it may be doomed to fall apart. That it can come together is demonstrated in the very geography of this city, the physical and cultural meeting place of Asia and Europe. To stand at the top of Istanbul, as I did with Ibrahim Tahin, who was the chairman of the Borsa and a graduate of this wonderful university, he pointed out to me as we looked across the city some of the emblems of the world's great faiths: a synagogue, a cathedral, a mosque, and on the crossroads of history. Continents mingle their waters right here in this city, an object lesson for humans. But how does education unlock tolerance? First, of course, by giving us knowledge that broadens the mind, letting us see beyond borders or nations or religions, or whatever parents taught us when we were growing up at home. And of course, the more we see, the more we have to open our minds, if only to make room for what we are seeing. That is what education gives us. As our minds expand to accommodate the new knowledge, the notion grows that there is more to the world than we thought. And maybe, just maybe, we are not the sole standard, the only measure of truth. That's the beginning of tolerance. It only works, however, if we receive the more important gift education can give us: the capacity for critical thinking, the ability to observe and analyze, to think and reason before we judge, and God knows, certainly before we act. To unlock the human capital we need to unlock in the 21st century, we need to exercise our understanding of each other's aspirations and interests, and drill our brains in how to balance those aspirations and interests with our own. The more education makes us practice those skills, the more supple our mind, the more flexible our thinking, the sharper our vision. But I help run a stock exchange, so let me tell you what I think. It is no stretch to suggest that what education can do for the individual and for the world is not unlike what the capital markets can do for the individual in the world. Both open new paths of opportunity, both the people's interests together and encourage people to look at one another. Both can thus be forces for peacemaking. Both education and the flow of capital lead to better lives for individuals, and by initiating innovation in one case and funding it in the other, both bring about the betterment of the world as a whole. Both stretch the realms of possibility. NASA today operates in 50 countries. We power about 90 different stock exchanges, and that includes all different kinds of markets and clearing institutions. Our workforce is as diverse as the United Nations. Is it any wonder that our foundation awards grants to higher education institutions, China and in other places around the world? In fact, an initiative that I started was to fund a program at the Central European University to provide 3 students a year grants that will enable them to get MBAs and Masters of Finance degrees. And we'll continue to do that, and we continue within our workforce in our locations around the world to have mentoring programs, where candidates for jobs and students from the areas work together with our business leaders and introduce them into the greater business community. Here in Turkey, Borsa Istanbul's program for funding public schools is really one of the great examples of what corporate responsibility should be. It's helped tens of thousands of students achieve education by literally funding the schools. When the Borsa Istanbul was restructured a few years ago by the sale of their real estate, effectively, lack of a better term, a foundation was set up that has $1 billion that will continue that practice for future generations, which is an extraordinary thing. For both NASDAQ and Borsa Istanbul, these are commitments to the power of education to drive economic growth and job creation, and yes, to stretch and open up more minds. Many years ago, I was offered a very important public policy position, a public administration position by my dear friend, Governor Mario Cuomo of New York, a good friend of John's. It was to run, or it was to build, actually, a new city. It's called Battery Park City, next to Manhattan. It had been started by Governor Rockefeller, but had faltered during the fiscal crisis in New York, and Governor Cuomo was tasked with making it work. So I had just left government. I had been the state's chief labor negotiator for a number of years, and I literally was there for 6 months when I got the call and said, "You know you're bored." I said, "Yes, but I'm making a lot more money." He said, "Nah, that's not what turns you on." He said, "I want you to run Battery Park City." I said, "What? I don't know anything about doing real estate." He said, "Well, you have 3 assets." He said, "First, you're a good negotiator. It's all about negotiations." He said, 2, you understand public policy, and this is a public-private initiative, so we have to protect the public side of the equation, so knowing public policy issues is important. But he said, your most important asset that you bring to that job is that you know what you don't know. He said, and you're smart enough to figure out how to get it. I actually think that that was the greatest compliment that anyone ever gave me, that I know what I don't know. Today, with my gray hair and advancing age, I'm very proud of that, because it actually makes me equipped to do almost anything. Well, the English word educate comes from a Latin word meaning to lead out. I'm told that the word was also used to describe taking a ship out of the harbor into the open sea to start its journey. I love that image. Educate a person and you take him or her out of a safe harbor into a sea of exciting and potential risky possibilities. Unlock his or her assets of intellect and understanding, and you give human potential a bigger chance to make a difference and a wider sphere in which to do it. Capital flows in that sphere as well. Like the mind, it knows no boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fruscher, for your remarks. Learning your perspective as someone from the private sector has been enlightening indeed. We will now have break for lunch and resume at 14:45. For those of you that are joining the Istanbul Chamber of Commerce luncheon, your transportation is ready right outside. Thank you.